Music has become somewhat unique in today's world. It's now easier than ever to teach yourself how to play, perform, and compose online than it ever has been in human history. With any device capable of web browsing, you can access lifetimes worth of music itself, as well as theoretical, historical, and practical information for musicians, artists, engineers, anyone involved in the creation of sound as art. Instruments themselves, as well as music software and production tools, have become much more accessible and affordable, empowering a whole wave of creators over the last half century, or maybe that's too long. Well, I don't know, days could be about right. Over the last several decades, we'll call it, to create their own work and become more involved in the musical output of the culture. The situation has obviously not always been this way. Like, imagine yourself as an aspiring composer or musician in the 17th century, or maybe during the Renaissance era. Instruments were luxury items that could not be mass produced. They had to be made one at a time by hand by extremely skilled and specialized artisans. There was also no way to record music, so even listening to it itself required you had to be in the presence of someone who knew how to play, had access to an instrument, and had time to play for you. During those times, to learn music at all, you had to work with a teacher. There just wasn't really any other way other than having an instrument and just kind of stumbling through it yourself, which I guess was still possible, but not nearly as easy or fun as it is today with the help of the internet. So in today's world, why do people still seek out music education if all of this is available online? What is the value of working with a teacher or pursuing a college degree in music as opposed to just learning on your own and exploring that way? What's different between the two approaches? When I reference self-teaching, I mean self-directed and informed study and practice. Self-directed meaning one chooses exactly what to do and when, and self-informed in that one does not receive feedback from an outside party. This type of learning can take a lot of forms, like learning theory or analysis from a book or website, learning songs by ear with or without some other notation, watching interviews and instructional videos online, and maybe picking up production techniques from analyzing your favorite songs by ear or just kind of watching other producers' work. People who teach themselves independently are termed autodidacts. So in a musical situation, how would this be different than working with a teacher? At a base level, I think what really differentiates these two paths the most is the presence of immediate and honest feedback from someone who is not you. A teacher is a musically skilled outside perspective who you trust, and they can quickly correct any mistakes or bad habits you might be forming. Even outside of real-time instruction, a teacher can guide your actions and help you prioritize what to do with your practice time outside of their sessions. Musicians studying under a teacher will always have something to work for, something to move towards. There won't ever be a period of directionlessness. There will always be something to achieve. And their objective stance can be incredibly valuable for really any musician. Occupying an objective stance on your own work and playing can be really difficult sometimes. Even when we think we are being objective, there's just subtle ways in which we aren't. And having that consistent source of objective truth or just another outside perspective will really help you grow as a musician and player. Feedback aside, the overall context that a teacher can wrap a student's musical experience in can be so valuable, as many students will just lose their way kind of exploring different things and they won't see a way that they can unite or a way out of their constant circling and just imbalance. Working with a teacher can really help you orient yourself in the broader musical landscape. They will understand your interests and goals and will be able to guide you along a path that serves those goals most efficiently. This type of very specific direction is critical for people who want to become very specialized, let's say instrumentalists, like a master flute player or something like that. They need to have a course of action that is really tailored to that goal specifically, and working with a teacher who has achieved something like that can accelerate the progress towards that goal exponentially. Teachers can also help you network and connect with other students, other teachers who you could learn other things from, gig opportunities, other things like that, because they're established within the community, right? They know other musicians, they've taught lots of other musicians. I'm sure they know at least something about what they might have ended up doing. You know, there's just a lot of ways you can end up meeting more musical people by associating with musical people. Studying at a university can also help you in this manner. There's not many other ways or places you can find those types of communities, like an entire student body just organized and dedicated to musicianship and the craft of music and performance. So all of these are really good things that can help you as a musician from studying with a teacher or academically at a university. So it seems like an obvious choice then, right? Like if you want to be a really good musician, you should find a really good teacher or go to a really good university, right? Well, in 2020, we can't forget about the option of self-teaching anymore. It's a very valid way to become a skilled musician. It's also pretty expensive to pay for a teacher and private lessons, especially a college degree in music or a college degree in anything, really. Pursuing that type of education is costly. So yes, there are many, many benefits, but self-teaching is also an attractive option when you consider the cost. So what does a self-taught approach bring to the table that could maybe make saving that money a smart move? Well, the obvious one is that it's cheaper, right? You don't have to pay for a college degree and you don't have to pay for lessons if you're just studying yourself, right? It's free. Books and an internet connection cost far less than lessons or a degree and can potentially give you the same result, right? You can also study exactly what you want on a self-taught approach. There's no limit to what you can reach out into, and there's also no expanse you have to reach to if you don't want to. You just do what you want to do. Students in university programs and other trained musicians often have to specialize and focus on just very specific things, which is not bad, but it doesn't leave a lot of time for exploration. So if you are more of the kind of explorer type of artist, you might not really find working with a teacher to your taste. It seems like self-teaching would be for someone who just wants to go as broad as possible, right? But there's also another side to it. Being self-taught means you can isolate any one thing for as long as you want and be as deep and as thorough with that subject as you'd like to be. There's no clock that you have to keep up with or curriculum that's telling you, okay, it's time to move to the next thing. You're just studying what you want. Taking this approach also has some benefits outside of music. If you can successfully teach yourself musical performance and theory concepts, then you're more likely to try to teach yourself something else. And then you're more likely to succeed because you're building that self-teaching experience. So it kind of builds this meta skill of self-teaching in general. It also helps us to enjoy learning more because we have less resistance to it. We're more likely to try something new and maybe take a new approach or explore something we haven't done before if we know that we don't have to seek outside help for it. So being able to build this skill can help us just see and taste and do more in general. You're also going to bring your own unique perspective to the things you're studying and practicing as a self-taught musician. Context and presentation are critical elements of human experience and understanding. So when you're working by yourself and you just have your own unique experience, it's going to differ a lot from the way that information is presented to you with a teacher. The teacher is going to present it in their own context with their own experience in a way that they think is going to have an effect on you, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is different. It is going to be presented to you in a different context than it would be had you discovered it on your own. Successfully teaching yourself music is going to build a lot of discipline for you as well, because being able to honestly critique your practice, your writing, your other musical work, your performances is going to take a lot of discipline to really sit down and do. It's not easy to just look at yourself honestly like that. So if you can really do it, it's going to build that discipline for you to be more self-aware in other areas of life as well. And if you're teaching yourself, your style has a lot of room to become very personalized and hard to recreate. You're really kind of limiting your exposure to pre-made ways of doing things. So you're kind of having to come up with things from scratch and find your own way and kind of make your own systems of thought along the way. So that's going to help you build a unique style that works for you and other people might not necessarily understand. If it's done right, a self-teaching musical approach can be extremely rewarding and valuable for the person undertaking it. But that if is a very big if. As a self-taught musician or self-taught anything, there are so many ways to sabotage yourself and lie to yourself that will hinder your progress and could slow you down for who knows how long. Each of the advantages of self-teaching I've just discussed can easily be reversed into a pitfall that you kind of have to balance over as you're walking this self-teaching path. And as you're going through it for the first time, it's not really easy to tell where they might be or what it would feel like to be in one. So let's talk about the fact that it's cheaper. That's not always a good thing. right? We tend to be more invested in things that we invest in, right? If we make a purchase, it kind of serves as a ritual, right? Of our commitment, of us crossing that border of like, I have spent actual money on this. So it's going to become something different psychologically for you. As a self taught musician, you're not going to experience that ritual in the same way that a trained musician would, or someone who has a college degree in music. Studying at your own pace can also turn into a dangerous pitfall. Because there are no boundaries on what you might study, you can often get in a trap of constantly needing new information instead of taking time to master and integrate information you've already discovered. Progress can be drastically slowed or maybe halted completely by lack of a well-defined deadline. Autodidactic musicians obviously want to get better, but many of them resist defining how and when that's going to happen. Goals will kind of expand to fill the timeline that we give them, so never setting a deadline really means our goals will never be achieved. Like I mentioned, being self-taught requires and can build a lot of discipline, but this lack of accountability to a teacher or to a curriculum or to your own grades can actually diminish the amount of discipline you have. Another surprisingly tricky downfall of being self-taught is just how lonely it can get. Making music and learning music with other people is such a great experience that's often really hard to find for self-taught musicians. They just don't have the same group to always go back to, and that's constantly being refreshed with new students and other things like that, where there's an established place where they all meet. I mean, as a self-taught musician, you probably just spend your time in your practice room at home, right? Alone. A lot of musicians aren't predisposed to the level of introversion that kind of entails, so working alone and self-teaching might not work for them. It might be a lot better for them to learn alongside an instructor or with a group of students. Probably the most overlooked downfall of self-teaching for musicians is that lying to yourself is extremely easy. Richard Feynman, a legendary physicist from the 20th century, said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." When we perform for an audience or in front of a teacher, we kind of immediately know how good that performance was. We can't just lie to ourselves in that moment of visceral clarity with the audience's reaction or a teacher's response and even our own response. And we have an honest perception of exactly where that performance stands. Opportunities for this kind of real, direct feedback for a self-taught musician are much more rare than you might think. And without that, it can distort your perception of your own abilities over enough time. As a self-taught musician, you're probably going to be lost a lot. Your next step is not always going to be clear. Learning kind of needs to happen sequentially though, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense to study advanced calculus if you don't know basic arithmetic. There's a sequence there that is most effective. The same is true for a lot of techniques and concepts in music. But as a self-taught musician, a lot of the times the only guide you're going to have is the table of contents of a book you're reading. Maybe that helps you get through the book and kind of assimilate that information, but at the end you're left with, well, what book do I read now? A teacher can help you avoid that situation entirely and keep your progress steady and goal-oriented. You're also going to waste a lot of time on things that don't really matter as a self-taught musician. So tell me if this situation sounds familiar. You're browsing YouTube and you see a video that's titled 10 things every jazz guitarist should know. So you say, I probably don't know those 10 things. And you click the video and you watch it and you see, I know maybe 2 or 3 of those. And then you start to feel this gaping void of well, they should all know it, right? I should know all 10 things. So you just toss whatever you were working on, just gone, right? And then you spend the next week and a half just working on those other 7 things, kind of frantically and feeling weird about it the whole time, and then at the end you realize you're not even a jazz player and you don't care about this stuff right now anyway. The nature of a lot of online music education content is kind of designed to make you feel that way. It's designed to attract you with a title or an image that suggests here's a secret you should probably know that you're kind of lacking right now, so you consume it, you amplify that lack, and then you kind of just feed in this cycle of oh, I need to find the next thing. Right? That feeling of lack is largely artificial in a lot of ways, and it makes us feel like we need to know everything before we are ready or before we're good or whatever word you want to choose. The reality is that you need to pick a specific goal and just move towards that goal, right? And then consume things and do things that are relevant to that goal, and consume other things too, because I mean, it's always good to expand your perspective. But if you feel lack from another perspective, then it's not really relevant to your goal, right? Kind of along the same lines, self-taught musicians often lose sight of their overarching purpose and general goals when they're working at becoming better or building skills. Like, do you really need to memorize every single mode of every single scale and know all their arpeggios and all inversions before you start working on that new song? Do you need to alternate pick perfect 16th notes at 240 beats per minute before you track that guitar solo idea? Is it absolutely critical that you know every single chord voicing possible for the progression you just made before you just track it? All of those things are good to know and understand, but they probably won't define you or your art in any significant way. It's easy to convince yourself that it will, though, when you're working alone. Working with a teacher or other students can kind of remind you what's relevant and what's important. Whereas working alone, you're kind of left in this like reflective chamber of ideas and thoughts, right? You're just advising yourself, which is informed by the reflections of your other past thoughts, and it just can get kind of weird. You also will not have anyone to reliably go to with questions working as an autodidactic musician. Usually, the most efficient way to learn something is to ask someone who already knows how to do it, right? They can just tell you, and they can tailor their response to your specific situation and goals and needs. The alternative for self-taught musicians is just Google search, YouTube search, other things like that, which can lead you to a great result and lead you to some information that will really be helpful for you, but it's going to take a lot of footwork, right? Like, you're going to click a lot of links, you're going to find a lot of things you don't need, you're going to find a lot of stuff that's written to a separate audience that you are not meant for, right? But the teacher is just straight to you. There's no work. I think both approaches, like self-teaching and working with a teacher or in a university, have advantages and disadvantages that really need to be weighed in light of your own situation and goals. But no matter which path you take, there are some things that you really can only learn through experience or on your own that teachers or books can't really show you. No amount of theoretical knowledge or technical skill is going to write a moving song for you or imbue your performances with spontaneity and emotion. No book is going to get you out of a writer's block. There's no class that's going to teach you better stage presence, how to deal with criticism and praise, or find the perfect lyrics to capture your unique experiences. The creative and human aspects of music can't really be taught to us by a teacher or a book. We have to be willing to take risks and put ourselves out there and really experience these things firsthand. Like I mentioned, I am a self-taught musician primarily. My formal music education ended in the 8th grade when I stopped playing trombone in the middle school band to focus on guitar and sports when I started high school. I've encountered all of the pitfalls I mentioned earlier of self-teaching, and I'm speaking about them from my own experiences. For me personally, the most difficult ones have been dealing with isolation and losing sight of my overall purpose and direction. I do enjoy working alone as a composer, but not always, right? It's nice to have people around to bounce ideas off of and to just tell you like, hey, you're being dumb. Like, that's dumb. Like, don't do that. You know, like having those people around is pretty valuable. Music is meant to connect people, and working alone for me, I often lose sight of that. And I just get so obsessed with, oh, I need to finish this song of like my own thing, you know? It's not just all about like what I'm doing here. I need to connect what I'm doing with other people so it can really have an effect. I've also spent a lot of time just focusing on things that don't matter for me, right? Like, I'm not a piano player and I don't regret spending time practicing piano, but I remember a week where I like just started completely obsessing over like, oh, I need to be a proficient pianist and I need to work on my technique, and it really doesn't matter. Like, I'm a guitar player. I can compose for piano, I can play piano somewhat, but I didn't need to have that like negative feeling about it. It just needed to be something I was exploring. But as a self-taught musician, it's easy to fall into that trap of that like, oh, I need this. I need to understand this to be adequate or to be right as a musician. But that's really just artificially induced, and it's easy for me especially to fall into that working alone. For me personally, being self-taught has helped me become a better composer and music writer. But just because that's my experience doesn't really mean it's a general fact of self-teaching or anything. For me, I think this is the case because I've always prioritized composition over learning other people's music or just drilling technique in my practice time. I've always been more interested in composition, and that's just always been the most fun for me. So as a self-taught musician, I've just pursued that much more thoroughly than I have learning other music or just drilling. Specifically, I think this helped me become a better composer because it helped me move past the fear of being bad faster. Doing anything original, like creating original music or painting your own ideas or anything like that, you're gonna have to just get over the bad part, right? You're gonna be bad at it for a little while. And I think working by myself let me move past that faster because there was no one telling me like, oh, this is bad, right? I was just having fun in the beginning, and like I could kind of tell I wasn't where I wanted to be, right? But I just kept doing it because there was no negative aspect to it. It was just fun. So a lot of people might have similar self-teaching experiences, which it would be a good bit different, I think, if someone was working with a teacher in that period. They might not have as much interest or emphasis placed on composition, depending on the teacher, obviously. So another thing I'd like to say about self-teaching, and just in my experience of this in general, is that education cannot kill creativity. It's just not possible. And a lack of an education does not really stimulate it. I know a lot of self-taught musicians believe that if I study theory, it will ruin my creativity. Or if I study this piece of music, I'm only going to copy this person, or, things along those lines. But it's just not true, right? It's just not true. There's no validity to that at all. That's like a novelist saying, if I understand the English language and grammar and have a good vocabulary, it's going to make my writing worse. That's obviously false. The same is true with music. Studying forms of music and other complete works and other theoretical concepts is not going to diminish or stifle your creativity in any way. All it can really do is change your perspective. But I will say that the inverse of this is not necessarily true either. Working with a teacher or studying does not necessarily imply creative ability or skill. Teachers and materials can only really guide us, and the creativity and the human parts of it, we have to be willing to just do, right? And get over the being bad part until it becomes fun. Then we sort of become our own guides because we know what we like to do and we know what we like to experience through our creativity, so we can just chase that feeling of having a good musical experience. So I've said a lot here about self-teaching and working with instructors and learning music philosophies and other things like that, but I think the key takeaway here is that what is important, no matter which path you take, is being specific with your goals. Working with a teacher does not really help you if you don't know what you're trying to learn, just as teaching yourself is only going to pull you in circles as you move from the next idea to the next idea to the next idea, unless you have kind of a story, a narrative to structure it. Music is infinite in its interpretations, its facets, its performances, and its uses, and any of them can become a subject of infinite investigation. We need to kind of place ourselves within a musical story, right? Where we move along a path to an end that we would like to become a reality. Without doing this, our practice time and our creative time is just going to be not wasted, but it's not going to be as efficient. It won't be as directed. It won't be as true to what we really want. So taking that time to reflect and become aware of why you make music in the first place, what type of musician do you want to be, what sorts of projects do you see yourself being involved in, what kind of energy do you want to bring to the larger musical community, defining all of those things on your own terms is extremely important. Much more important than the decision to work with a teacher or work without a teacher, because that should really come later, right? You should define why you're making music and kind of understand that, and then choose the path that serves that the best. So aim for something you would like to see yourself become, or something you would like to achieve, and then focus on the daily level actions that will actually propel you towards that. You can't go wrong there. My self-taught musicians, my trained musicians, my non-musicians, and just everyone, thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned a little bit, about what might be in store for the path of a self-taught player versus the trained or university educated player. There's a good bit of difference, and I think it's worth investigating each path to know what's right for you, no matter where you are in your musical journey. You know, you could have been teaching yourself for 15, 20 years, and now you want to take some lessons. You know, it's just worth investigating. Or the reverse could be true. Maybe you've been taking lessons forever and working with an instructor, and maybe you want to move into a more self-guided approach. It's definitely worth exploring and really asking yourself the important questions to know what will be best. So anyway, I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you.